Elvis Presley was first recognized on a lunch break from his post-high school job as a truck driver? Did you know Elvis had a twin, but unfortunately his twin passed on early on in life? William McKean wrote about this in his article about Elvis's journey to fame, titled What We Talk About When We Talk About Elvis. Why am I asking these ridiculous questions? Because like you, I didn't know any of these facts either. I didn't know anything specific about the 1950s until I started doing my research for this speech. What is the 1950s? What was their music, sports, rights, fashion, medicine, and involvement in the military? I have written a speech that will allow you to decide what part of the 50s was or was not important based off authors and their findings. Let's start with music and segregation. William McKean, author of the American History article, describes Elvis's importance. McKean says, "He never held elective office once, but that won't matter to his legions of admirers. You watch, someday, somewhere, someone is going to carve his face into the side of a mountain. Even in death, he had the power to take us to the dark places of our souls, where he's surrounded by sorrow and loss." Elvis was born in Toledo, Mississippi in 1935. It wasn't until 1953 that Elvis decided to step into Memphis recording service and cut a tape of his singing voice. The woman supervising the recording, Marion Keisker, heard something special and switched on the tape recorder. Sam Phillips, the owner of the business, liked Elvis, but he finally put the pieces together in 1955 with guitarist Scotty Moore. McKean also describes the impact Elvis Presley made on American history with his love for black music. He states, There on Sam Phillips' yellow-labeled Sun Record Catalog number 209, he did what the Supreme Court tried to do with Brown versus Board of Education. He brought black and white America together. Heart and Mind's article from Times Magazine states, "The effort begun by the Brown decision remains to be completed, and it was no easy task for the nation." Heart and Minds also says, "The court ruled the separation by black children generates a feeling of inferiority as to their status in the community and may affect the hearts and minds and will unlikely ever be undone." Continuing on, sports and military conflict. John Maximuk, the author of The Coffin Corner, shows how much these professional football players and draftees did by showing off the most impressive one, Eddie LeBaron. Eddie LeBaron was commissioned in the U.S. Marine Corps Reserves while at the College of the Pacific and served in the Korean War after graduation. He was wounded twice in combat and was awarded the Purple Heart and the Bronze Star. After this, he would play for the Washington Redskins and the Calgary Stampeders before ending his playing career with the Dallas Cowboys as the franchise's very first starting quarterback. Maximuk explains his statistical reasoning for how he found how many players were in the military. He says, Finally, I examined the NFL draft registers from 1954 to 1959 to find draftees who did not immediately begin their NFL careers. Some were future draft picks who had not exhausted their college eligibility. Some signed with the Canadian team instead, and some were simply cut from their training camps. For the rest, I tried to confirm whether they indeed entered the military through newspaper searching. Maximuk shows statistical data of the amount of time lost due to the military and how it affected the team's seasons. Maximuk states, I found 258 players missing potentially 439 player years of pro football. 60 of the players appeared in at least one Pro Bowl, and 4, Mike McCormick, Ollie Matson, Forrest Gregg, and Willie Davis, are in the Hall of Fame. The rough positional breakdown is 24 ends, 66 linemen, 18 quarterbacks, 48 running backs, 40 defensive linemen, 17 linebackers, and 45 defensive backs. Moving on to diseases. Although there were less diseases, they still did exist, such as the polio outbreak in the 50s. David Oshkinsky, author of Miracle Workers for American Heritage, explains why people were willing to be a part of the largest public health experiment in American history. He says, A Gallup poll showed that Americans were aware of the polio vaccine trials and knew the first. More Americans were aware of the polio vaccine trials than knew the full name of the President of the United States. Never before, it appeared, had the nation been as captivated by the pursuit of a medical or scientific objective. Such fascination was understandable. By the 1950s, polio had become America's most dreaded infectious disease, as it fell cruelly and inescapably every summer, putting children in particular at risk. Oshkinsky explains who created the polio vaccine and how the world knew that it was working. It took a full year to analyze the results of the polio trials. On April 12, 1955, the 10th anniversary of FDR's death, the announcement was made. Salk, the inventor of the vaccine, had done it. His vaccine was safe, potent, and effective. Oshkinsky also describes how FDR survived the disease and some more background information of him and his encounter with polio. FDR had polio long before it was called polio. He had it quite a few years before. Moving on, fashion and life for women. Joyce Spannabel Emery, the author of Shifting Trends Post-War 1950s, her article explains how fashion changed after World War II. During the war, fabric was restricted, but after the war, fashion changed because you could use more of it. Emery also does an amazing job of explaining which major fashion industries were booming at the time. She says, when the war ended, 5 major companies were producing patterns: Advance, Butterick, McCall, Simplicity, and Vogue. Emery also hints what was expected of women during the 1950s, as all of their clothes were made for cleaning a house. She says, pattern designs for aprons epitomize the push to revert to women's role as homemaker in the post-war culture. While patterns for utilitarian aprons continued to be offered, fancy frilly hostess or cocktail aprons became popular for suburban housewives, placing emphasis on leisure, mid-class pursuits such as luncheons and cocktail parties. Wanda Adams' Dropout cover story explains why life doesn't have to be that way for women. After a 14-year marriage and having 3 kids, 35-year-old Wanda Adams walked out on her family to make a life of her own. The article states, I tell other women I didn't think marriage is a rewarding, fulfilling life, she says. It is merely adequate, and they're kidding themselves that they don't realize they're going to need more than just marriage in life. Wrapping it up, what is the 1950s? What was their music, sports, rights, fashion, medicine, and involvement in the military? I hope, now that you have listened to my speech, you have formed your own opinions on those topics. Going back to Elvis. The next time you want to try to get into the music business and your mom tells you to get a real job instead, she might be helping you on the right path, even if you are a truck driver before you get there. Thank you.